All right, y'all. Turn me on up here. Yeah, you're good. Check, check. There we go. You might want to go a little bit louder. They won't have to take it off fence. Turn it up just a little bit more. All right. That way you guys can stand from about right here. Good to have you guys with us. We got the Pfeiffer family, right? Missionaries from Ecuador. I'm going to turn it over to them after I open us up in prayer and let you guys have it. We look forward to seeing how the Lord's using you guys and where He has planted you and your family. Would you pray with us? Father, we love you. Lord, we thank you so much for the opportunity to come here and just hear how people right here from this area are being your hands and feet. Lord, the gospel is the story that is changing lives today. It's not just here in Anderson County. Lord, I pray that your time with us tonight, or our time with you tonight rather, would be ordained. Lord, that you'd be pleased with it. Lord, I pray that you would help us to learn more about how this message of the gospel, Lord, was given to all men, no matter creed, color. Lord, the ground is level at the foot of the cross. And Lord, I pray that you would help us today learn how we can just join part in this family, join with them. And Lord, if anything else, the greatest thing that we can do is join them in praying for their ministry. Lord, I pray that you would help us have receptive hearts. Lord, pay attention. Lord, and I pray that you'd continue to use this family in a mighty way. In Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Good evening. Sorry for running right here in the last minute, but it's wet and cold and a little dark out there. So thanks for having us tonight. You want to do how we're doing?
Yeah. So this is my husband, Jonathan. I'm Becca Pfeiffer. I was born and raised in Orangeburg, South Carolina. That's where I got to know Tammy. We were at the same church in like my childhood years, her growing up years. And so that's how we got connected with you guys, and we're so excited and so thankful that you guys extended us the invitation to be here. And I just, every time I think about Northgate and I think about just Miss Tammy's family and things, I remember how her mom really just poured a lot into all of us kids. And so I just want to share this as an encouragement to any of you that are doing ministry with different, like with the children in the church, that the Lord really planted a seed in my heart for missions, for serving in ministry abroad when I was just a little kid. And I remember like every missions friend meeting, every Girls in Action meeting, just being so excited and so captivated with the idea of taking the gospel somewhere where it wasn't. And God has just used that so much in my life. And so I hope that's an encouragement to any of you that have children or that have invested your lives in the children of the church, is that they do grow up to become adults that can then take the gospel to other places. And so thank you for doing that. Thank you for making that investment. I know it's a big investment to make. So thank you for that, and I hope that's an encouragement to you. I grew up in Orangeburg. My family moved to Clemson, so not far from here at all. And I went to North Greenville University. That's where I met Jonathan. And he was born and raised in Ecuador. His parents were missionaries. So very different childhoods. But it's really cool to see how God just kind of brought us together and is now using those two backgrounds for us to be able to do the ministry He's called us to. Did you want to share more about that, or you? Nope. Okay. So we've lived and served in Ecuador. This coming September will be 10 years since the first time that we moved there. We first went. Jonathan was at seminary at Southeastern Seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina. From there, we served at a church in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and then we moved to Quito to serve at an international Christian school, actually the one that he graduated from high school in. So we served there for a year, and then God He just made it very clear that Ecuador is where we needed to be and where we needed to serve. So we started looking for other ways we could do ministry in Ecuador, and we got connected with some different tribal ministries that were really interesting and exciting to us. We really felt like that was where we could pour in the most and be the most effective. We wanted to take the gospel we wanted to be helpful to the church in a place that didn't have a lot of help, if that makes sense, where there weren't a lot of resources, and we just wanted to see like how God could use us the most. And so he very clearly led us to a tribal ministry in Shell, which, if you're not familiar with Ecuador, if you went like directly south latitude to the equator, we're basically right south from South Carolina. So if you just went straight down, we're right there. And it's a very, varied country, lots of climates and things. So there's highlands, there's desert, there's jungle.
Yeah. So you can pretty much find any climate you want in Ecuador, and Ecuador is the size of the state of Colorado. So you can go to the beach, you can go to the desert, you can go mountain climbing, and you've got temperate rainforest like in the cloud forest, and then we've got jungle rainforest. So you've got huge variation of climates within a small country.
So it's a really unique place, and I think that the biggest thing that God's taught me in like the last 10 years is that he is always going to use situations that don't seem ideal for his glory and my good, ultimately. One like major story that I think of every time I think about like God's faithfulness and his goodness was that soon after we moved to the jungle, to Shell. I got pregnant with our first child. His name's James. He's 5 years old. And, I had no idea what I was getting into. But I was seeing babies be born all over the jungle all the time. I had a lot of friends that were pregnant, and I just thought, well, why would we go anywhere else to have a baby? We'll stay right here. So we found a private clinic that we thought would meet all of our needs. And so we found a doctor we felt semi-comfortable with. It was all it felt very fast-paced and a little bit crazy for me. My Spanish was still in progress. It still is, to be honest. And so, medical appointments and all these sort of things were a little bit just an experience that felt like we'd rush in, we'd hear information, and we'd leave, and I'd nod, and then afterwards I'd go, I don't know what just happened. But so the whole time when like other friends would ask me, are you nervous about this? How do you feel about having your first child in the jungle? And I just said, well, babies are born here every day, so God will be with me and it'll be fine. But like, I'd really rather not have like a bunch of interventions or anything. Well, when it came time to like in the last few appointments, my doctor was like, okay, so we're going to schedule your induction on Sunday morning. We're going to do this, 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 and this. And at that point, my Spanish was good enough that I was tracking, I was going, okay, this was not the plan, but I just had a lot of peace about the whole thing. And so I said, okay, that's what we'll do. So we show up, no breakfast, all the things that they told us to do, our little bags packed. And I ended up having to have a cesarean that day. And, it's a social health care system. There's a lot of intricacies that come with that, even in the private sector where we were. But so this was like a few weeks early from my technical due date, but we had our first son. It was a little bit scary. There's still some trauma I'm unraveling, to be honest. But God's goodness was just written all over that day. Like right before they said, okay, we've got to take you in for this cesarean right now, Jonathan had a moment of like, oh no, I didn't think it was going to come to this, And we're in the rainforest. We're up high, like five stories up in this clinic. And we look out the window, and it had been like just kind of yucky all day, like a typical rainforest, cloudy, gray day. And we look out, and there's the most beautiful wide rainbow, like across our whole window. And I was like, look, like this is God's reminder right now that he's like his promises ring true, always. And it gave me the peace that I needed in the moment. And I think it gave him the peace he needed in that moment too. But all of that to say, this was not the plan. This is not how we thought things would go. And my body really sustained a lot of damage from that cesarean. But we stayed in the clinic for a couple of days. We got home. Within 24 hours of when we got home, our whole area broke out in road strikes for the next 15 days. No one was allowed on the roads. There were tribal people popping tires with their spears. Like, they were rioting in the streets. You could not go anywhere. So had I pushed back with my doctor and said, no, that's not my plan, that's not what we're doing, then I very well could have ended up in a really dangerous situation and not able to even use the roads to drive to the clinic I would need to go to for help. There were several situations where ambulances were not let through the roads. And so I look back on that and I just think, man, God was painting a picture for me in such a real way that he was my protector and that he would give me the peace that I needed to walk through situations that seemed not ideal, but he had my good in mind the whole time. He was protecting me, he was protecting my son, and he's healthy and wonderful, and I don't think that he would have lived through that experience had it played out any other way. And so I'm super thankful for that. That was my first year in the jungle, which was very different from serving in the city. And I just feel like God was solidifying my understanding of his faithfulness and his goodness, and that he had a plan for me and my family in the chaos that it sometimes feels to serve in a third world country. So I just wanted to share that from the beginning. And then also, so we lived in the jungle for 2 more years. And then from there, we started serving with the Three Waves movement, which is a different tribal ministry than we moved to the jungle to serve with. And they eventually asked Jonathan to move up into a more leadership role. They've asked us to move to the city now, so we live in the capital city in Quito, which is a high elevation Andean city, which is very different, but it gives us a reach that we didn't have before to be able to work with other tribes that we didn't have access to when we lived right in the middle of the jungle. So did you want to share anything, or do you want to just skip to the video?
So like Becca was saying, we served in the jungle in Shell for 3 years, and then they asked us to move to Quito. If you're able to find Quito on a map, it's in the middle of the country, and all of our jungle area is on the east side of the country. And so living in Quito, we're more centrally located, so it makes it easier to get to the northeast quadrant and the southeast quadrant of Ecuador to do those things, which is why we're in Quito. So I wanted to kind of give a preface to that, to why we're not in the jungle, but we're doing jungle ministry, and we live in a city. And our video will kind of go into what we do a little bit more, but I just wanted to clarify that. So if you don't mind playing that video, if we can get it up, that would be awesome.
Our 2 boys, James and Asher, and we're currently serving in Ecuador, which is in South America on the equator. My wife Beck and I serve as the country coordinators for the Three Waves movement. The Three Waves movement is a collaborative effort between 3 groups of people, the first being the North American Church and its missionaries, the second wave being the local national church, and the third wave being the tribal church, and our goal is to reach the unreached people groups of the Amazon. Unreached people groups are any group of people that have no established evangelical church. Included in that are uncontacted people groups, which have little to no contact with the outside world or the gospel. I am honored to serve on the leadership team for the Three Waves movement, which is so much larger than Ecuador, as we serve in all the Amazon basin. And I've been encouraged by tribal leaders and their spiritual maturity to realize that they can't accomplish this work on their own. And so they've reached out and they've asked for help. And so we do this because they've asked us to. This is a strategic way to fulfill the Great Commission because they are the most equipped for the job. They are able to go into the jungle and understand what it is to leave your culture, understand what it is to leave those things behind that are not godly. And we are given this opportunity to come alongside them, to encourage them, to go with them if we need to reach the unreached people groups of the Amazon. I am a 3rd generation missionary serving in Latin America. I had the privilege of growing up here in Ecuador with my parents being missionaries, both here in Quito and in Shell, which is in the jungle. It's been amazing to me to see how God has used that with me growing up in the jungle and swimming in the river, spending time with different tribal groups, and now as an adult, being able to spend time with those same people that are in the church and serving their own people and leading churches and leading Bible studies, to have witnessed in my own lifetime how the work of other missionaries and my family has brought us to this point, and God has orchestrated it, and it's just a huge privilege to be a part of it. You may notice from our logo that it's 3 people in a boat. These represent our 3 waves: the foreign church, the national church, and the tribal church. And so we're inviting you to get in the boat with us. How can you do that? Firstly, we need prayer. So if you can commit to praying for us, we'd love for you to get on our mailing list so we can share with you what's going on with the movement. Secondly, through giving, if you are able to support us financially monthly, that helps us to do what we need to do, both for our family and for projects within the movement. And thirdly, we'd ask if you have any skills that you think would be helpful, or if you want to be a part of what's going on physically, then we'd love to talk to you about that and see where maybe that would fit in. We just invite you to be a part of what we're doing, what God's doing in South America and the Amazon region. And so we're inviting you to be a part of it.
Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20. And Jesus came and he said to them,
Chiga kita tunyanga ante paku chiga sepaku nima paku ande nima ke mandai.
Tuma samte ashi nunkanam werum ashi shuar intiatarum
bautizangawa yaya Dios pa shutivi.
Turaram vinya chichamor vi akupkamia rume nuka chikichik ains ainyo miatru sarang umir karat tu saram nuiñartaram.
Y he aquí, yo estoy con vosotros todos los días.
Nawan anino angene ante itota angakaimba.
Let's fulfill the Great Commission together.
All right. So that's a little introduction to the 3 Waves movement as we went through that. So I just wanted to give you an example of how we have seen that work practically. Okay, so our goal is to raise up tribal men and women to be missionaries to tribal people. We have an example of a tribal missionary, a friend of mine from Brazil, and he went into a community that was uncontacted, and so nobody knew what language they spoke. They didn't really know anything about them, but he went there to see if he could make any headway and kind of investigating. And when he got there, he found out that they spoke his language. And so he gets out of the boat and he starts talking to these guys in his language, and he's able to share the gospel the same way that it was presented to him with them. And the entire community came to know the Lord. And which is like, just an amazing thing. And so he spent a couple days with them, and then he said, okay, I gotta go home. And they're like, you can't leave us. You just brought us this great news. We need you to stay. And he's like, oh, I gotta go home. I got a family, and he's like, but we will send somebody. So the 3 Waves helps, is the way that they've helped with that is that, so he's established a relationship with them. We know their language. We've had converts. So what we did was we took 2 couples that are also from his tribe that speak his language that want to be missionaries, and now they live with this village, and they're helping to raise up and disciple basically the church, establish a church in this community that had never heard the gospel or anything from the outside world before. And so, like, for us, that's a huge victory, right? Because we're trying to reach the unreached people groups, so the Amazon, and that's just a really good picture of how that works. And like I said in the video, they understand each other in a way that we never could, because as much as I grew up on the river there and spending time swimming in the river and fishing in the river and canoeing and all those things, I can't relate in that way. Like, I've never been a hunter-gatherer and that be the way that I live, like not knowing where my meal is going to come from tomorrow. Never lived that way, right? And so in a really clear picture, really real picture of that is is this example of my buddy from Brazil, right? In Ecuador specifically, because that's where we are the coordinators, right? So this has been the team. Beck and I have been the team for the last 5 years. Well, I guess, yeah, right after James was born, we got into this. And so this last year, I'm going to go into this, sorry. Ecuador has its challenges. And the main challenges that we see are that there is class division. Like, I mean, you have people that are either very wealthy or very poor. The middle class is almost non-existent in Ecuador. You have racial tensions. So Latinos tend to think that they're better than tribal people. Tribal people are very looked down upon. They don't consider them trustworthy. They don't have a lot of faith in them being able to work or take a job or any of those kinds of things. They don't even try. And so there's a lot of division there. And then there is distance, right? So because it's a small country, like I said, it's the size of Colorado, but it takes a long time to get from the north to the south is like 16 hours. East to west isn't even possible, So distance is a challenge too when it comes to how people relate to each other, right? So like if you have jungle people, they don't relate to people that live at 9,500 feet in a city that has 3 million people in it, So some of the challenges we faced, or the country faces, I guess, on the whole. But despite those things, what we've seen with our coordination team. So this last year, we were able to form a coordination team, and that's been a huge prayer answered because, like I said, this has kind of been the team for a while. But we've been pouring into and discipling some of the individuals you saw in the video. So we have Mateo and his wife, Emma. Mateo is Zapara, and the Zapara traditionally were the slaves to Quichuas. I don't know if Quichuas are the biggest people group in Peru and Ecuador. Yeah.
I just want to add in there, we get immersed in this this topic, and so sometimes we forget that it's not just common knowledge. There's at least 15 tribal groups in Ecuador. How many of those are lowland tribal? Do you know?
I think 7.
7 of them are lowland tribal. So when Jonathan's talking about a class system, there's non-tribal Latinos that are Ecuadorian. That's one class. And then among each of those tribes falls somewhere on the class system. So even you can't even really group okay, and then tribal people are here, because in each tribe they're looked at differently. And so it's really interesting watching how that plays out in marriages and different things, because it's almost like you're trying to climb a ladder by who you associate with, who you marry, who your children are with, that kind of thing. So it really does influence a lot of different things. And so the coordination team that we've been able to start forming is all of tribal people, but from different tribes. So I just wanted to add that in, sorry.
Thanks. So my clarity here. So, so we have Mateo, his Zapata, and his people group were considered slaves. So you're looking at somebody who's tribal, but even lower in the tribal, because his people group were subservient to the largest tribal group in South America. His wife, Emma, is Achuar. The Achuar people consider their wives or their women less valuable than their dogs. So that's where she comes from. And so when they married, it was kind of a weird thing, because they're 2 different tribes, but they're also kind of the lowest to the low, right? But Mateo speaks 5 languages. He's a pilot. He's a ham radio operator. He's a certified security guard, and he went to seminary. So he's
and ex-military.
Oh, and he's ex-military. So he's very well equipped to do a lot of things, right? Emma also went to seminary, and she speaks a couple languages. I guess she speaks 3 languages. They're very, very well-equipped people. Mateo's been trying to get a job, a steady job, for 5 years, and can't get one. Yeah, and I was going to talk a little bit about them. So Mateo and Emma lived in Shell, in the town where we lived, and they had an apartment. And he felt a call on his life to be a missionary to his own people. And there was a group of them that were living kind of in a squatter village outside of town. And so he moved out of his nice apartment and moved into the squatter village where they didn't have running water or electricity, to hopefully one day build a church there. And so that's been their heart, and they did that. They moved in like 7 or 8 years ago is when they finally moved into that community.
And that was like a huge leap of faith. They made this transition out of like a town where they had, running water and power and things like that.
Stores.
Yeah, stores were easily accessible. And they moved into the squatter village that had none of those things. So, and then simultaneously, he lost his job, right? So it felt like opposition as soon as they made that leap of faith. And I don't think that there's been a moment where that opposition has stopped. Like, they are very clearly trying to plant the gospel and share it over and over so faithfully. And they just hit one wall after another. And it's like Satan is just fighting them so hard in every way. I'm sure you wanted to share more about them, but I wanted to add that.
No, I just wanted to say, so they're two of our coordination team that we've been working with for 5 years. I've been spending a lot of time discipling and coming alongside of Mateo, and also with Emma. We have them in our house a lot when we lived in Shell, and then we also take a week and we go visit Shell pretty much every other month. We've been going for a week so we can spend time with Mateo and Emma. And then Juan and his wife Lucy are also in that area, and Menye. So we've got Juan is Shuar, so he's another tribal group. His wife Lucy is also Zapata. She's half Latina, half Zapata. She's spoken Spanish on the video. And then Menye, or Minuan Nkimo, is Guarani. And he's not married, but he's part of the group. And then we have another couple, Ramon and Dora, who are in the northeast part of Ecuador, and they're Kofan. So that's our 7 people that we're just super thankful for God bringing into our lives that we've been working with. Dora and Ramon are kind of a new couple to us in the last year, I guess. But everybody else we've been working with for about 5 years. And so in 24, we were able to get them together, these 7 individuals, with our executive team and our leadership team for South America. And they asked them, do you want to form a team, a coordination team? And they're like, yes, which for us is just like, thank you, Jesus. We really need this. And just a huge blessing. So that's kind of one of our big things that's happened this last year. But Becca was talking about opposition there with Mateo and Emma and the community that they were in. But with COVID, before COVID, Mateo would go knock on people's doors and try to share the gospel with people. And he'd get the door slammed in his face, and he's like, Jonathan, I don't know, we're not making any headway. Nobody wants to talk to us. And they would steal from him. They'd kill his chickens. He had a generator. They sabotaged his generator. They killed his dog. I mean, just people just hating on him, right? COVID came, and a bunch of the missionary community were giving money or food or things for Mateo to be able to distribute food in his community, because there it was way worse. You had to wear a mask if you were outside. You had gloves. You had to have a good reason to be outside of your house. You had to be like, I'm going to the store, I'm going to the pharmacy, whatever it was, or you get a ticket. And if you got ticketed the 3rd time, you go to jail for 90 days.
And that was only from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Yeah, you could only be outside between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. So it was a lot stricter. But Mateo, tribal guy, we were like, we're going to give you food, and you can go and hopefully distribute food to these tribal people you live around, right? So he started he'd have chicken and rice and things, a whole basket of things, and knock on the door. Well, people open their doors now because he's got food, right? And then they're like, why are you talking to us? We've just been mean to you. So then he was like, well, let me share with you why I've been why I'm doing this. And so the first family that converted was 5 or 7. I think it was 7 people in a family. And they all came to the Lord. They all wanted Bibles. And they were like, Mateo, we want you to help teach us, disciple us. We want to know we want to know more about the Bible. So they started meeting. Well, it went from 7 people to right around 250 people before COVID was over. So you had this church, right? The church he'd been praying for. So that the church got established, and then I was going to go into this this thing. I want to tell you a story. All that is a preface, I guess, to this for us. So Mateo, the church has started, it's established, and we have different partnering churches here in the States, and one of them wanted to come help him with building classrooms and bathrooms for the youth group, or the youth and the young kids in the church. And while they were there, we're working on it, and the first day, Juan shows up. And they're not the same tribe, they don't have the same ministries, but he shows up and he's working with Mateo and he's helping. He's a contractor, so that's kind of his trade. And he's there, and everybody's like, kind of like, well, this guy that's Suarez here working with our Zapara guy, and they're just like buddies, and he's there helping. And then Mateo had just got his driver's license, and somebody's like, hey, Juan, your truck's in the way, can you move it? And he's like, no, I'm in the middle of something. And then Mateo's like, I'll move it. So he throws Mateo his keys. Mateo gets over there, there's 2 kids sitting in the back of the truck, and he's like, get out of the truck. And they didn't listen to him, so he turns on the car, and he does it, it's an automatic, and he had learned on a manual, right? So it's the opposite of what we have going on here, right? And he throws that thing in reverse and drove right off the road. And so he goes right into a ditch. And
this is a rocky road. Like, this is not a paved road. It's a built up jungle road.
Yeah,
you know,
so
like,
it's
so
a dirt road in the middle of the jungle, a meter high, right? So he drives off the road. So then it's like, one of the kids falls out and gets hurt. Or he jumped out and landed on some rocks, so he got a little hurt. And so then there's this huge crowd of people all crowding around. They go run and get Juan. They're like, Juan, he's crashed your truck, you know. He gets over there, and it was just like, he looks, he's like, is the kid okay? I said, I'm going to take him to the hospital. And he looks at his truck, which is, you know, like part of his livelihood. And he looks at it, and he's like, well, it's God's truck. I'm going back to work. And he just goes back to working in the church. And I just thought, like, that struck me, because I don't know that I would have been like that, you know, if somebody trashed my truck. But it was just like it was a huge deal, because you're seeing these tribal guys that love each other. He's loving on Mateo and working with him. And so for us, those 2 guys were very solidified as far as our group goes, our coordination team goes. And then
of people we wanted.
Yeah, of people that we would want working with us, right? Because they're already doing the ministry. They're already loving their people. And then the very next day, Menye, the Warani guy, he shows up. He's like, hey, I'm here to help. And he stayed all day. He speaks English, so he spoke English to our team, and he speaks Spanish, so he was translating for them, and he was helping lay block and cement and everything. And it was just a huge blessing for us to see these three guys, just how they interacted with each other, how they loved on each other to accomplish building this classroom and bathrooms for this church. And so that's why the 3 guys and the 2 guys' wives are with us on this coordination team.
3 wives.
3 wives, sorry, yeah. And then, I don't know, as far as this, with Emma's reaction to that, or
Okay. So,
or people's reaction to the accident, I guess.
yeah. So one thing that's really difficult sometimes to maneuver in tribal culture is that there are very large emotional reactions to things, very vocally. And a lot of the time, things will be very monotone. You won't know someone is very happy until they're very comfortable with you. But when something scary happens, there are very big reactions. And a lot of time, anger is like the first reaction about anything and everything. So when Mateo was backing up, or was moving the truck, and one of the teenage guys jumped out of the truck, they thought that he had been run over. And so the way that he was laying, it was very it was all very unclear what had happened, and it happened so quickly. And so there's like such a big emotional reaction. Emma, I think, had come back from cooking for everybody. So she's walking back. She's seeing that like her husband is just getting out of this truck, and there's a kid on the ground underneath the truck, and what is happening? And the kid's family immediately, like someone tells them, they come running. There's just all this chaos happening.
Burning
Yeah, and so immediately, like these are all, like this is their neighbors. Like this is a small squatter village community, you know? They all know each other incredibly well. They know everything about each other. There's not a lot of privacy, you know?
Most of them are related to each other.
Yeah, most of them are related in some way or another. And so they immediately, like Mateo and Jonathan are trying to figure out how to get this kid to the hospital. And people start threatening Emma, Mateo's wife. And they're saying, we're going to burn your house down tonight. We're going to burn your house down. And she's like, we're here, like, I don't even have to be here right now. Like, I had a very comfortable life in town. Like, my life looked completely different, and I've given it up to be here to share the gospel with you. And we see her model that time and time and time again, where she sets aside what would be comfortable and good and easy for herself and her family to do good for her community, to live out Christ's love to them. And so even in that situation, they're saying, we're going to burn your house down tonight. She's sobbing on Jonathan's shoulder because she's scared for her kids and her home. And then she turns from that and turns around and says, well, I'm going to the hospital. She spent the entire night with that teenager in the hospital advocating for him, because so many times in the public health care system, tribal people are not listened to the same way. They're not treated the same way. They're very disregarded. And so she still, even with those threats being thrown at her and how scared she was for her family, she still put that aside and said, like, I'm still going to make sure that he's well taken care of. Like, I'm going to make sure that this kid gets the care that he needs. And the only way that's going to happen is if I'm there, because she's one of the only women that I've seen that she is just so confident in the Lord that she will speak up. She'll push back against cultural norms. She knows that, like, she has value and that every person has value, which is so incredible when you think about her background of being raised in an Achwar family where her mom was one of 11 wives. 11. You know, like, I can't even imagine sharing my dad with that many people, and each of them having multiple children. You know, just everything in her culture told her she has no value, but she's very rooted in the fact that, like, God has told her she does have value, and that everyone has value. And because of that, she is such an amazing advocate for other people. And sometimes I just scratch my head thinking, why would people be so unkind to her when she puts aside what would be good and comfortable for her family and for herself to go advocate for someone else? Like, she's advocating for their community when the mayor makes a promise about bringing in a road system or bringing in power, bringing in water, and then he doesn't honor it. She's the one up there, like, advocating for them. And then the community just turns around, and instead of appreciating her sacrifice, she just receives a lot of hate. She receives threats. And she knows they're not empty threats either. You know, like, there are things that happen in her home that don't make sense besides someone is doing them to her. Like their generator being sabotaged over and over. Their home being broken into over and over. All these things. I get so floored when I see her faith. And every time that, like, I talk with her and ask her how she is, she'll share, you know, this person did this, or in this ministry meeting, that was said, you know, just all these little small things where she's just being insulted on every side. And then she always ends it, before I can even encourage her, she's like, and God's still so good to me. You know, like, she is just so solid in that. And it's truly just an inspiring thing to be around her and see her, like, in these situations. And not only that, but she's one of the only tribal women I know that works a job outside of her home 6 days a week and then serves her church on Sundays. I mean, it's incredible to me what she's able to do in a day, you know? But I wanted to share that. It also was a really telling thing for us that Emma felt that comfortable that she could let emotion out with Jonathan. Just that she was able to like let those tears out, like that she was scared in the moment. She was being threatened. She didn't really know what had just happened with her husband in the truck and the teenager. But it's for us, we've really been amazed by how God has just kind of formed this team, and there's a level of trust that we can't explain other than that, like God is opening their hearts to be able to trust us as like outsiders. Even with Jonathan's background, we're still considered outsiders, you know? But for tribal people to trust us and love us and be able to share life with us is just, the only way it can be explained is that the Holy Spirit's doing it. And so many things are cultural norms that can only be explained because the Holy Spirit's working.
You have to remember that Emma comes from the people group that I was saying, like, that their women are valued less than dogs, right? And so Emma's heart and desire in ministry is to go back to her people and tell young girls, teenage girls, children, that they have value, and do whatever we can to help those kids to get out of those situations that are bad, because there's a lot of abuse, sexual abuse, and really like family incest, things like that, because of that abuse. And so like we're really excited about her, and the movement as a whole is really excited about Emma, and supporting her in that ministry of trying to reach her own people groups, so specifically the young women of her people groups. So that's I don't know, that's a lot of what we wanted to share, just some stories of what's been going on, the people that we're working with. So now we have these 7 individuals that are working with us. They are tasked right now as part of our team to be reaching out to 3 tribal leaders or pastors that are doing, or ministries or pastors that are already doing the work, to invite them to what we're calling a pre-consultation this year in May or July. We haven't nailed down the dates yet, but we're expecting between 60 and 100 people to come to this, and it'll be a week-long, or three days, I guess, is what we nailed down, right? So 3 days, a 3-day event where we're going to explain what the 3 Waves movement is more in depth to them, and see if they would like to create a tribal network. The idea with that would be that there would be representation from each tribe within like a board or a network, so that we are aware of what's going on in each community and in each tribe, and each tribe would have an equal voice as to what their needs are, and then we can all work collaboratively to make those things happen. And what you see happening in South America and Ecuador specifically with those things, and why we say that, so everybody has a voice, is that Ecuador is world famous for the Guarani, right? Because they speared the 5 missionaries back in 56, and so like nobody's that old in here, but that they would remember all that stuff. But it was a huge movement, right, with Jamelia and Nate Saint and the 3 other guys that were speared. And so the Wadani people specifically are world famous. So you'll have like an NGO from like Switzerland come over and be like, we want to build you a school. Or you'll have another European country come over and say, we want to get you guys clean water or solar panels or whatever. And so the Wadani have a ton of stuff coming to them, right? Whereas you might have a Shuar community that's just a few miles down the river that nobody knows about, and they don't know what their needs are. And so they don't have a runway, they don't have clean water to drink, they don't have anything. And so the idea would be that with the representation from each tribe and that are believers, those pastors be able to say like, we need clean water, or we need bathrooms, or our church needs a new roof, or whatever it is, but then we can have a clearer picture of what the needs are in Ecuador. So something to be praying for is that consultation.
And also with that, I mean, the overall goal is for each of these tribal churches in each different tribe and community, for there to be a sustainable tribal church That means that they would have elders that would be leading the church together, and that they would all be discipling and training younger people to come and replace them as they get older. So that would be like the first goal, and then from that, all of those churches to be mobilized to the communities that don't have the gospel or don't have a church. That's like the ultimate goal. So there's a lot of like the projects that Jonathan was talking about that are good and helpful, and we can use those as entryways to bring in the gospel. So that's like, we want to meet the physical needs, but more than that, we want to meet spiritual needs. And so there's like a double whammy to all of these projects too.
So I just wanted to clarify a little bit on that. But for us right now, if you could be praying for that pre-consultation where we're going to be meeting with this large group of tribal leaders, that would be one of the top things to be praying for. We're here in the States raising our monthly support because we need monthly support to stay in Ecuador and do the ministry. And we're also working on a special project, but we're trying to build a home. So we've raised funds to purchase a property, and we want to build a home on it that would be our ministry hub, because right now our house where we live, our rented apartment, is the hub because it's just, it's us, right? So we're hoping to be able to build a house that would be our house, but also be our office space, ministry space where we meet with people, and then we would have a guest house on the roof that would be ideally a couple apartments up there where we can house our tribal guys and their families if they need respite, or if we all need to gather together, we have the space for that. We also receive teams from the states, the churches that support us, to come to visit with us. So there'd be a space for that as well. And then as a country coordinator, I host other coordinators and our executive team for South America. So it's a big project that we're trying to raise funds for the house and office space. So if you could be praying for our monthly support and for that project specifically, that'd be amazing. And then also Becca's pregnant, so we're expecting in July. So we're here for a little bit longer than we thought we would be, but that's a huge prayer to just that everything would go well with pregnancy.
I have a few minutes.
Yeah, I don't know if we have any time or not, but if there's any questions or maybe anything anybody would want clarity on.
You were telling me earlier about the drug violence. Does that affect the tribes?
It does some. The violence not so much, but they are used for trafficking drugs because they know their way through the jungle, and so when we first got to the jungle in 2018, a lot of teenagers were getting arrested for drugs, but they were carrying a backpack full of drugs for the cartel because they knew their way through the jungle to avoid getting stopped by military or police. So it does affect our northeastern part that borders with Colombia is probably the worst part. Like technically by the embassy standards, I'm not supposed to go there. I have, but I mean, it's just part of life, right? But that's probably where it's a little bit more dangerous, is on the border with Colombia, but mostly that's for kidnapping. Not that that's any better, but basically they will, I'm trying to think in English, sorry. They'll kidnap people for ransom and then they return people, but where we work mostly, no, it's not a huge deal. A lot of what I was saying at dinner is a lot of that stuff is geared more on the southwestern part of the country and the northeastern part of the country, and we're right in the middle, so it doesn't affect our day in, day out for the most part. Quito is a relatively safe city, but it is a city, so it's like a city here in the States would be. You have random acts of violence, Any other questions?
What do y'all do? Like, how do you use the churches that come to help physically? So
we've had a church come and do one example, we had a church come and do a retreat for our missionaries, because oftentimes missionaries don't take time for themselves to just do nothing. And so what we did a weekend, I guess it was like a long weekend, where we had, this team brought a bunch of goodies and things, stateside stuff, like candies and snacks and things, and had a basket for each family, and then we did a few sessions that were on like rest and renewal and what the Bible has to say about taking your Sabbath, because we're always working on, Sundays, what we consider our Sabbath. So we did that with one of our teams. We've had a team come down and do that, Sunday school classrooms and bathrooms there. Construction projects, yeah. But there's a lot of opportunity for things. It just depends on what a church is equipped for, or the people that are coming are equipped for, because we work with different ministries. And so it's kind of whatever is needed at that moment to further a ministry.
Things that we have access to in the States that you guys need that we could help? I know we had a friend at one time who was a missionary in Africa, and they had a huge need for vitamins, so we sent a lot of vitamins to them. Are there things like that that maybe you can't get there that you need, or?
So the answer to that is kind of tricky, because there are things here that we definitely need or would need, but they're next to impossible to get there, to get them from here to there, just because there are so many laws on what you can ship in and ship out, I guess. What do you say?
Well, when teams come, we're able to fill their suitcases, because most airlines give you 2 suitcases, and you don't need that for a 2-week or 1 week trip.
Yeah, so depending, if it was vitamins or things like that, yeah, you could bring some of that stuff in a suitcase. I guess I was thinking more tools and things like that are harder to get in.
Solar powered is super helpful.
Yeah, solar powered batteries or flashlights that recharge that way, or light bulbs. I take a dozen light bulbs that you can hang up that have a line that goes to just a little solar panel, so they can have light at nighttime. It's kind of a cool thing. Headlamps, any kind of headlamp, those things are not, we can get a 200 lumen flashlight, and if you're in the middle of the jungle, you want something a little brighter than that. But yeah, no, there's definitely things like shoes. Shoes are really expensive in Ecuador. Tools are really expensive in Ecuador. Medicine is readily available for the most part in Ecuador, and it's pretty easy to get a hold of. So it just depends. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if that actually answered your question.
States, when we go out and minister to anyone, you pretty well can assume that they have heard something about Christ. But when you go into an area where they absolutely know nothing, is it hard to start that conversation?
Well, so the nature of what we do is most of the places that have not heard it, we're not the face of what's doing that. We're trying to empower tribal people to do that, right? Because mostly it's tribal people. Also, Ecuador has a really long history of missions. It's over 150 years of missions. But the country on the whole is more Catholic. And so those are interesting conversations, because Catholicism there is not what Catholicism is here either. It's more of a
blend.
It's a blend. Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. So
mystic.
The Catholic Church would come in and take on whatever religion was there and just add it into the Catholic Church. And so the Catholic Church is very confused. So yeah, if it's in Spanish, no, it's not really too hard, because you just kind of start out talking to people. For me especially, because I'm white, I'm a white Ecuadorian. So I start speaking Spanish to people, and they're like, who are you? Where did you come from, right? And so let me tell you about myself a little bit, and then we just start talking, and I was telling somebody the other day that it's we have a car, and I'll be I haven't shared the gospel with somebody in what feels like forever, right? because like we're discipling, we're working constant with people that are already believers, right? And God will break my car down, and then he breaks my car down and it goes to shop, and I'm upset about that because I like being able to drive myself around. But what it does is it forces me to use public transportation. So I'll be in like a cab or an Uber or whatever it is, because I'm doing like an hour-long commute somewhere, and I get an hour to just share the gospel with whoever is driving the car. So, and in those moments, it's like, well, I'm Catholic. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, tell me about Catholicism. Like, where do you go to church? And then it's like, oh, well, I haven't been to church in like 15 years, but I'm Catholic. And then I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. And then it just opens up doors to be like, well, do you, as a Catholic, do you feel like you're going to get to heaven? And he's like, I don't know. I was like, well, that doesn't sound very hopeful, does it? And he's like, no, that's not hopeful. Well, let me tell you about the hope that we have, right? And you're able to share. And I've had guys give me their numbers, and like they text me randomly. And so I guess what I can say to that is, like, I'm not perfect by any means, but I just feel like I tell the Lord always, just use me as a tool wherever you have me. And so like our main focus in ministry is tribal guys and ladies, but a lot of what I end up doing is in the city with Latinos, and then we're also plugged in with a church where I work with the men's ministry there too. So, but we don't have a lot of interaction with uncontacted people, specifically us.
I think too, like something that I've heard through, like we have teammates throughout the Amazon, and so the stories that we've heard from them the most.
He was rolling pictures.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
but a lot of them, I think that they use kind of a similar of like every tribe has some kind of belief system. They might not have ever heard anything about Jesus or nothing to do with the gospel, but they have some kind of belief system. And so there's like an with that of like, well, what do you believe? What do you believe about, like snakes often have different meanings in different tribes.
Mostly death.
Yeah, mostly death. I mean, like the Warani that are like one of the most famous ones, like they had a belief system that involved like revenge killing. And so it controlled every part of their lives, that like if anything died, there had to be a death to atone for that death.
It was a blood debt had to be paid.
Yeah.
So, and they usually did that with people. So if it was like if your daughter fell in the river and drowned, then you went and killed somebody because their blood had to cover your daughter's death. And that was how they believed.
And you can imagine how like that snowballs. Into so much death because you're in the jungle where death is already like a high.
Everything's trying to kill you in the jungle.
Yeah, basically. So, I mean, but what I've heard so many of our like tribal teammates say from around the Amazon is like everybody's got a belief system. So finding out what theirs is, normally there's something where you can say, like Jonathan said, like, well, where's the hope in that? Like, do you have a security of anything in that? And starting to like question, not necessarily pick apart, because I think that like establishing a relationship normally is like a base, just like we saw Jesus do so many times, but then asking questions that get to the heart of where that isn't Jesus. This belief system that they have is not the gospel that could give them eternal hope and salvation, So I just wanted to share that too, because we have heard that over and over, is like, find out the belief system, go from there.
Yeah.
Will you share what you have down here on the stage?
Sure. So we've got a little book that has some pictures of the beautiful landscapes of Ecuador. There's a sheet here that's kind of an introduction to who we are, some of the stuff we talked about tonight, and our prayer card here in this little basket.
And like, if any of you like have any connections to other individuals or other churches that you think would be interested in hearing about this, that letter of invitation just kind of explains some basic, like an introduction to us. So you can feel free to take that and share that with people. And then our contact information is on both the prayer card and the letter.
We got just a couple things here displayed from different tribes. So there's the basket has a necklace in it which is that Wadani? I think it's Wadani. The basket has a necklace in Swadani, just so you can see some of the stuff they have. There's a wooden cross in there that is made by two of the grandsons of one of the spearing party that speared Jim Elliott, Nate Saint. And the cross is made from Nate Saint's house in Shell. So we've been helping support their ministry by buying these crosses, and we tend to give them away to people. There's a Schwar comb, some clay pots and things, just some artisan stuff that they make, just so you kind of see them. And then there's a map of the Amazonia, so you can see where we're working. And there's a list if you would like to sign up for our newsletter, our electronic newsletter, or join our Facebook group too. That would and some Ecuadorian candy.
Come and check it out. Tammy, you got stuff over
Yeah, there's
there?
some cookies and brownies and some drinks in the Lowry building.
Awesome. Anybody got any other questions? They'll be down here. You can come talk to them, come check their stuff out, and get to know them. When are we all, like, how often are you here?
In the States, our goal is to spend at least 2 years on the ground in Ecuador and then be here for 6 months, mostly so that our kids get to know their grandparents. When I was a kid, it was 3 or 4 years out of country, and then we'd be back for a year.
Yeah. So for this trip, like, we're living in Hendersonville, North Carolina, and we'll be here at least through July, because that's when we're having the baby. So Jonathan will probably take a few trips back in that time, but yeah.
Whatever you flying to.
I'll go to Atlanta, from Atlanta to Quito, yeah.
Cool, thank y'all for coming. I'm gonna pray, and then hang out, come talk to them, and then and look forward to following you. I'll really encourage you to, I mean, it's really hard to share what all God's doing through their ministry in an hour, so I really encourage you to get the prayer cards and the sheet down here, and follow on Facebook, and then and so we can stay plugged in here as a church. And the greatest thing we can do is join alongside them and pray, all right? Would you stand, and as we close with prayer, and then we'll move it to the front and then out there. Father, we love you. Lord, we thank you for people who are willing to be the hands and feet. Lord, how amazing it is, God, that we take for granted just how easily available the gospel is to us. Running water, things that just at our exposure right here. Lord, I am convinced that I'm one of those that take for granted the fact that, Lord, when I turn on the faucet, water comes out. Lord, that there's a church on every street corner. I was raised to know the good news of the gospel. And Lord, and every person under the sound of my voice is the same. Lord, I pray for those people in places in Ecuador in this ministry, God, that are trying to get the gospel into the ears of people who desperately need. Lord, it's the only hope. As he said, it's the greatest hope that we have. It's not a hope that this might come to be, but a blessed expectation, Lord, and it is the best news of all. Lord, I pray that you would bless this new arrival into their family. Lord, I pray that you would bless their family as they're here and then getting ready to go back home to Ecuador. Lord, I pray that you would continue to grow their ministry, Lord, and Lord, we know that it's your will that your gospel reach the ears and hearts of your children that you love so desperately. And Lord, I pray that God, that you would help us to join alongside of them, Lord, and pray and find ways that we can actively be involved in helping their ministry. Lord, we love you.